What's that?
And there's Laura.
Oh,
Hi, folks. I'm going to be letting people in for a couple minutes here and make sure everyone is getting in.
I don't remember.
Don't forget to mute yourself.
yeah.
And we'll continue to be I'm sure people will continue to be joining for the next few minutes. So I'll be letting people in. But in the meantime, I want to welcome you all to the Woods Hole Historical Museum's conversation tonight. The Pirate's Wife, the remarkable true story of Sarah Kidd. And we're so pleased to have the book's author, Dr. Daphne Geanacopoulos, with us. I'm Laura Reckford, a member of the Woods Hole Historical Museum Steering Committee. A few housekeeping items before we start. Please keep yourself on mute. And if we notice that you've gotten yourself off mute and we can hear you, I will go ahead and mute you. But thank you so much for keeping yourself on mute. I am hearing some people, so if you could all mute yourself, that would be great.
I have no clue.
So I'm going to mute everyone, and then that will help this.
You have the ability to mute everybody since
Yeah.
you're the host of the meeting, by the way.
Yes, so I just muted everyone. And so that will definitely help. Again, I'm admitting people, but as I said, a few housekeeping items before we begin. We are recording the meeting and we'll put that on the museum's website, woodsholemuseum.org. And as I mentioned earlier, please keep yourself on mute if you can and save your questions for the end. You can put your questions in the chat. And we will have a good question answer session at the end. For those of you who are fans of the Woods Hole Historical Museum, I know many of you are, we are open for the season on June 17th. And so we hope you'll join us for the season this year. We've got a wonderful new exhibit as well as an always evolving exhibit about our village Woods Hole. And we are also always looking for docents and other volunteers, and we'd love to have you join us. It's a lot of fun. So please consider that as something to do this summer. And so for tonight's conversation, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Daphne Geanacopoulos. She's a historian, journalist, and author of the newly released book, The Pirate's Wife, The Remarkable True Story of Sarah Kidd. The book was published by Hanover Square Press, which is an imprint of HarperCollins. She actually lives just down the road from us, down in West Yarmouth on the Bass River. So it's nice to have a Cape Cod author with us. And she is also the author of The Pirate Next Door, The Untold Story of 18th Century Pirates' Wives, Families, and Communities. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Southern Living, Virginia Business, and other outlets. And so without further ado, we welcome Dr. Daphne Geanacopoulos. Whoops, and Daphne, you'll have to unmute yourself because I muted everyone, and so you got caught in the rush there.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to the Woods Hole Historical Museum for inviting me tonight to be able to share with you my book talk about my new book, The Pirate's Wife, The Remarkable True Story of Sarah Kidd. I'm really honored to be here, and as Laura said, I just live down the street. I'm right here on Cape Cod, and it's wonderful to be in my hometown area. The Pirate's Wife is a book that I
Whoops, and Daphne, you seem to have muted yourself by mistake, so you just hopefully we can get you back.
Okay.
Now you're back.
Okay. Now can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see the PowerPoint, so you're all set.
Okay, that's great. So as I was saying, The Pirate's Wife is a book that that took me 5 years to write. It is the first ever direct account of the life of Sarah Kidd, the wife of the notorious pirate Captain William Kidd. Sarah lived a long and storied life, and I'm going to give you a glimpse into it. I'm going to show you some slides, and I'm going to do a reading from my book. I hope you will all find Sarah Kidd to be easily as interesting and remarkable as her famous husband. Generations of readers the world over know the story of Captain William Kidd, the noble sea captain and privateer who turned ruthless pirate. The history of the golden age of piracy, in which Captain Kidd played an outsized part, is replete with the exploits of pirates of many stripes. Those who hoisted the black flag and prowled the seas, attacking 17th and 18th century merchant vessels bound for the West Indies, West Africa, and North America. Kidd's story is particularly striking. In 1699, Captain Kidd became the subject of a deadly political scandal involving top officials on both sides of the Atlantic, including the King of England. There was a worldwide chase, and eventual conviction and execution at the hands of colonial officials who may have been complicit in Kidd's darkest acts of piracy. It was a drama laced with lies, secrets, double dealing, buried treasure. The story of his journey from privateer to murderous pirate has been immortalized across the centuries in print, on stage and screen, in video games, and even in an epic 22-verse ballad. But our understanding of the legend is incomplete. What is largely unknown is that Captain Kidd had a partner and accomplice, a behind-the-scenes player who enabled his plundering and helped him outpace his enemies. This accomplice was his wife, the English-born Sarah Kidd, a young, well-to-do New York socialite whose extraordinary life is a lesson in reinvention and resourcefulness. Sarah was running a thriving merchant business in the New York City seaport when she met Captain Kidd. The encounter set off a high-octane romance that often operated outside the law. While Captain Kidd was plundering the high seas, Sarah Kidd was pirating in her own way, within the confines of polite society, working to ensure her husband never got caught and that the location of the buried treasure stayed secret. With bold determination to survive and to protect her husband, Sarah secretly aided and abetted her husband, fighting alongside him against his accusers. The most impressive part is that even after Captain Kidd was put to death for his crimes, Sarah remained an incredibly beloved figure of the community, securing a long and prosperous life for herself and her children. Sarah knew how to persuade, and she knew how to hustle. And in a time when women held little legal power, she found a way to ensure her future and to protect her family. But for more than 300 years, the story of Sarah Kidd has been all but erased from history. My journey into the world of pirates began in 2002, when I was commissioned by the New York Times to write a freelance piece for their museum's special section about the Witta Pirate Museum on Cape Cod. The museum contains the artifacts recovered from the Witta pirate ship that crashed during a fierce nor'easter off the coast of Wellfleet, Cape Cod in 1717. Prior to writing this article, I didn't know much about pirates, except what I had read in books and seen in movies. I thought all pirates had a pet parrot, like Long John Silver in Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, or looked like the handsome and fit Errol Flynn in the 1935 movie Captain Blood, or more recently, walked, talked, and wore eyeshadow like Jack Sparrow in the movies Pirates of the Caribbean. Looking at the everyday artifacts recovered from the pirate ship, silver coins, cutlery, pewter plates, a teapot with the shoulder blade of a pirate, pistols, cannon, navigational instruments, medical supplies, and even a size 5 shoe, leg bone, and silk stocking, I realized that these mythological figures were mere ordinary men. The legend of the captain, Samuel Bellamy, and his love interest, Maria Hallett, told me that pirates had connections on land. They had families and community links that we don't know much about. As I was researching my dissertation turned previous book, The Pirate Next Door, the untold story of 18th century pirates' wives, families, and communities, I kept encountering evidence of this mysterious woman who seemed oddly on the periphery of the story of the notorious Captain Kidd. Even the influential and authoritative early source book on pirates, called A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates by Captain Charles Johnson, did not include Sarah in the lengthy chapter on Captain Kidd. Sarah was alive at the time that book was published in London in 1724, and it would have been possible for the author to interview her or people who knew her. Finding Sarah's initials SK scratched on a colonial document at an archive in Boston started me on a thrilling journey to learn more about her. I would soon learn her initials marked the spot where love and law divide. To research Sarah's story, I had to use a variety of sources because women left little record of their affairs. Most women, including Sarah, could not write. Men owned all the property and exercised most of the legal rights at the time. I read the contextual history of pirates and of the time period to learn the political, economic, and cultural events that shaped Sarah's life. I was able to find some important primary sources of Sarah's, such as her petition to regain her seized property from the governor, Lord Belmont, and her last will and testament. Many of the ancient sources that I relied on were handwritten, and I transcribed over 250 of them to make them easier to work with. I visited archives in the places Sarah and Captain Kidd had been, including those in New York, Boston, and Rhode Island. I traced Sarah's steps in the surroundings she visited, especially in Manhattan, where she spent most of her life. I also found great resources in the Admiralty papers at the National Archives in London. I found a rich cache of letters that were in the sea chest of Captain Samuel Burgess's pirate ship when it was captured by a British privateer in 1699. The letters were in the pirate's mailbag and contained a few letters from Captain Kidd's crewmen aboard the Adventure Galley to their wives, and the wives to Kidd's crewmen. The letters are dated from 1695 to 1699, and they show that correspondence was conducted thousands of miles across the globe between Indian Ocean pirates and North American colonists, and that there was successful and direct communications between New York and Madagascar and back again. No letters from Sarah or Captain Kidd were among these letters, and none have survived, but there is every likelihood that they communicated during his 3-year voyage. They would have communicated through the Mariner's Mail Service, located on Ascension Island, a remote outpost in the Atlantic. New York merchant captains trading with the pirates in Madagascar stopped for fresh turtle meat and dropped off and collected mail left under a rock with a hole in it near the harbor. A letter from the wife of Captain Kidd's crewman, Jacob Horn, was especially helpful and informative. Writing from their home in Flushing, New York, on June 5th, 1698, Sarah Horn told her husband, quote, "We hear abundance of flying news concerning you." This meant that word had spread from port to port and ship to ship, and that there was trouble aboard the Adventure Galley. That trouble, we would later learn, was murder, mutiny, and piracy. To further understand the maritime world in which Captain Kidd was a part of, I attended a workshop at the National Archives in London and conducted research with scholars from the Prize Papers Project, a collaborative effort of the National Archives with the University of Oldenburg in Germany to research and categorize the thousands of yet unopened documents captured by the British in wartime in the 17th and 18th century. I examined trial records, depositions, personal correspondence, ship's logs, cargo inventories, and even a mariner's personal journal that was worn from wear in his front pocket. The manuscript room at the Library of Congress was a terrific resource, and Captain Kidd's own recorded statements gave strong evidence of their devoted relationship. Archivists and other historians I met were enthusiastic and helpful during my research, as was my trusty research assistant, Higgins, a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, named for a runaway pirate, Jeremiah Higgins. Here he is inspecting the galleys of the pirate's wife. Unfortunately, there are no contemporary paintings of Sarah Kidd. She can't be seen that way. But in 1911, the artist Jean-Léon Jérôme Fer created this painting of Captain Kidd in New York Harbor. The attractive, beautifully dressed woman with a lace fan holding Captain Kidd's hand on the deck of his ship is an interesting rendition of a woman who has captured his attention. One contemporary of Sarah's described her as lovely and accomplished. And the woman in this painting is certainly lovely. Kidd's velvet knee-length coat, a sword at his side, and a tri-cornered hat are historically accurate depictions of the attire of the period and what he would have worn as a successful sea captain. His gesture towards his lovely visitor, a suave, gentlemanly bow, and a warm clasp of her hand, fits with the charming demeanor he was known to display. While this painting is a figment of the artist's imagination, and in 1911, we did not know the story of Captain Kidd and Sarah, there is coincidentally some historical semblance of truth in it. Born Sarah Bradley around 1670, the future pirate's wife arrived in New York from England with her widowed father and two brothers when she was 14 years old. At 15, she was married to one of the richest men in the colony, a much older, wealthy New York merchant named William Cox. When Cox died tragically 4 years later in 1689, Sarah married a Dutch merchant and mariner named John Ort. It was then when she met Captain William Kidd, a well-respected gentleman with whom she began a friendship. Captain Kidd was Sarah's third husband. Sarah was a twice widowed 21-year-old, considered one of the most eligible and sought-after women in New York, when she and Kidd married just 2 days after her second husband's death. While the circumstances might appear suspect for Sarah and Kidd to marry so soon after her second husband's untimely demise, Kidd and Sarah were stellar members of polite New York society. They were New York's power couple. No untoward behavior was ever proved. At the time of their marriage, the well-built, well-dressed 37-year-old sea captain, who spoke with the hint of a Scottish accent, was one of the most respected men in Manhattan. He was a celebrated war hero and sought-after privateer. A privateer was hired by the government to legally plunder and seize enemy ships. He was a legal pirate. During wartime, the resources of warring countries were stretched to the limit, and privateers were extra hired hands who owned their own armed vessel and served as an auxiliary to England's navy. A privateer's assignment was detailed in a document called a letter of marque and reprisal. He had investors, and the captured prizes and cargo was shared with them. The captain and crew received a smaller proportion of the take. There was sometimes a fine line between a legal privateer and an outlaw pirate. Many a privateer, once out at sea and beyond the reach of the authorities, turned pirate to avoid having to share the stolen loot. There were other reasons. Turning pirate was an attractive alternative for some men, especially those with wives and families, because pirates lived in a highly civilized democratic society. They were paid well when the going was good, and they were treated fairly. Pirates lived by a set of rules called articles, and each pirate had to sign his name, or if he could not write, leave his mark as an X to join the crew of a pirate ship. With that commitment to be true to his fellow brethren of the coast, as they were called, came benefits. Each pirate had an equal vote, and most were given an equal share of the booty. There was a form of health insurance, life insurance, and retirement benefits. The pirate community was designed to support and maintain their relationships on land while they were at sea. For example, if a pirate died in action, his share of the booty was smuggled halfway around the world and given to his family. Turning pirate was a risky and dangerous choice, but for some men, a merry life and a short one was their motto. Sarah and Kidd's wedding took place in Manhattan on a rainy Saturday, May 16th, 1691. It was a day of high drama and grisly 17th century justice. England was at war with France. Pirates were plundering the high seas, and two traitors, the self-appointed governor, Jacob Leicester, and his son-in-law, Jacob Milborne, were hanged for treason against King William and Queen Mary in the public square. Sarah and Kidd attended the hanging after their wedding. A public hanging was an event everyone turned out for. It was a carnival-like source of entertainment. The stark contrast of the day, a love match and an execution, foreshadowed the dark drama that would be their life together. The Kidds lived in a mansion Sarah inherited from her first husband, located on the corner of Pearl and Hanover Street in the Hanover Square neighborhood of Manhattan. The waterfront property faced a wall, now called Wall Street, in the financial district of Manhattan. Coincidentally, their home was just a few blocks from the offices of my publisher, Hanover Square Press, an imprint of HarperCollins. I like to think Sarah found my publisher for me. Around 1692, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, and in 1694, another daughter, little Sarah. During the colonial period, giving birth was a social and bonding event where women looked after one another. Sarah's babies would have been born at home in a separate area away from the main living quarters. Men were not included in the birthing process, so Captain Kidd would have been busy doing something else. It was the job of women, relatives, neighbors, friends, and elders in the colony to act as midwives in the delivery. Special birthing linens were prepared and laid out. Sarah would have used a birthing stool, or perhaps a loved one held her upright and supported her as she progressed through labor. In the early stages, Sarah would have acted as the hostess of the festive occasion. It was an old English tradition for new mothers to serve groaning cakes, a nutritious baked good made of spices, molasses, rum, apples, and carrots. And to go with it, groaning beer. As they waited for the blessed moment, the women would entertain themselves with gossip, jokes, and stories. In 1696, Captain Kidd was given a dream job, 2 privateering commissions from the King, William III. His investors were some of the most important men in England, including the newly appointed governor of New York and Massachusetts, Richard Coote, known as Lord Belmont. Belmont's complicated relationship with Kidd would lead to Kidd's tragic downfall. In his brand new ship, one that looked like this, the Adventure Galley was a 287-ton warship with 3 tall masts, square-rigged sails, and 34 big guns. It was a hybrid ship called a galley, meaning that it could be rowed as well as sailed. His job was to hunt French enemy ships and to rid the seas of pirates who disrupted international trade. His commission was for 1 year. His initially unsuccessful voyage led to frustration, mutiny, and eventually Kidd's turn to piracy. Sarah was key to Kidd's fight for his life against the men who accused him of turning from privateer to pirate. She and their daughters spent time with Kidd on his pirate ship, and Sarah helped Kidd hide his stolen treasure. As an accomplice to an outlaw, she was arrested and imprisoned with him in Boston. Once released, Sarah helped construct the narrative Captain Kidd presented for his defense. She ensured he was taken care of in jail. She worked tirelessly to help secure a pardon, and she even tried to help plot an escape. After Kidd was executed in 1701, Sarah lived another 40 years. She reinvented herself, and she managed to go from one half of a criminal outlaw couple to a high society socialite. She secured her family's inheritance, remarried, had more children, and lived the rest of her life as a prominent and respectable citizen. She even learned how to write her full name. Sarah Kidd's extraordinary life is a rare example of the kind of life that pirates' wives lived during the golden age of piracy. Hers is a tale about love, marriage, motherhood, and survival. Sarah's life, and particularly her transformation from a New York socialite to a stateless outlaw, sheds new light on the political, economic, and cultural events of the late 17th and 18th centuries. From her, we learn about the economic hardships of widowhood, the political repercussions of piracy, the effects of war on the new emerging colonial economies, the business of slavery. Her story tells a broader story about how certain women were able to assert their will and reclaim their agency within the oppressive strictures of colonial America. During her 74 years, Sarah lived through 7 British monarchs, 21 New York governors, and she experienced firsthand the golden age of piracy. She survived 4 husbands and 3 of her 5 adult children. The Pirate's Wife, the true story of Sarah Kidd, recasts the image of Captain Kidd from a diabolical pirate to a flawed but decent man who tried to please his investors and protect his wife and family. He was a pirate, but not one with a black heart. Sarah's initials, SK, scratched on a few colonial documents, gave clues to her existence. Those bold pen strokes reveal a history we have only imagined, the dangerous, difficult, and thrilling life of a pirate's wife. They shed unexpected light on a young colonial woman caught up in a world of politics, passion, and grisly 18th century justice. The unknown SK is finally identified. She is Sarah Kidd, the First Lady of Pirates. I'd like to close by reading a passage from my book. It is from the prologue. Sarah Kidd laid in a weakened state in the bedroom of her Manhattan mansion. A highly contagious lethal disease raged through the colony, striking young and old, rich or poor, black or white. It was September 12th, 1744, and the 74-year-old Sarah had first taken to bed to get warm under her soft quilts and to rest her head on the goose down pillows. Then the chills, fever, and fatigue set in. She was nearly certain she had contracted the deadly disease everyone called diphtheria. As a precaution, she asked her family and friends to stay at a safe distance. She arranged for soft foods and a soothing drink made from the medicinal herbs in her garden to be left outside her bedroom door. Her mind wandered in a fever-induced haze. She closed her eyes and remembered herself in another time and place. She was a young woman with her husband, Captain William Kidd, on his pirate ship, the St. Antonio, a vessel laden with gold, silver, and jewels. As his closest confidant, she learned that he buried some of his stolen treasure for safekeeping, and he described to her where it was hidden. She was not to tell a soul. For more than 40 years, since his death in 1701, Sarah, the pirate's wife, kept his secret safe. Not even her 5 children knew. She alluded to it in her will, noting that she had assets in the city of New York and elsewhere. She did not identify elsewhere. Sarah worried about the consequences if her children were caught with stolen pirate loot. Her strong instincts told her it was best to leave well enough alone. As she thought back over her life, not all of her memories were fond ones, especially the time when she was a pirate's wife. But now the memory of the hardships and the heartbreak had softened, and Sarah wouldn't have traded it for anything. She felt proud, very proud to have been a pirate's wife, and she wore the title as a badge of honor. She repeated a prayer as her condition worsened. Almighty God, have mercy on my soul and pardon and forgive me all my sins and offenses, so that I may, after this miserable life, arise with our Savior, Jesus Christ. She became delirious from the fever and shook uncontrollably. The sheets were soaked with her perspiration. Still, the thought of that secret weighed on her, as well-kept secrets do. As she prayed for forgiveness, she may have thought it was time to identify elsewhere to her 3 children who paced downstairs in the living room. It wasn't long before Sarah developed a sore throat that felt like a razor when she swallowed. She tried to speak, but it hurt so much she could only whisper. Her daughter, Elizabeth Kidd Troop, peeked through the keyhole to check on Sarah. The once vigorous woman now appeared very small among the many furnishings and tasseled curtains. She looked pale in her white cotton bedclothes and so frail, lying on her side facing the door. Elizabeth saw her mother's lips moving, mouthing words, but she could not hear her. She strained through the keyhole to hear what she might be whispering. Elizabeth called for her brothers, William and Henry, who had stepped outside on the front stoop that faced the harbor. The cry of the seagulls seemed to signal the alarm. Elizabeth told them to hurry. Each took a turn at the keyhole, looking and listening. Sarah's breathing was loud and strained as she gasped for air. The 3 of them looked at each other with tears in their eyes when the room fell quiet. There was not a sound, not even a whisper. For over 300 years, treasure hunters have scoured the North American eastern seaboard, trying to find where elsewhere is. That secret is with Sarah, buried in the churchyard of Trinity Church, Wall Street in Manhattan. Thank you. I have put up on the screen just a little note about how to spell my name and how to find me. So you can contact me if you like to at my website, www.daphnePalmerGeanacopoulos.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daphne. And so folks, you can write down that website. I've also put it in the chat so that we can come out of the shared screen and folks can get that website in the chat. And we can also put it on the Woods Hole Historical Museum website for anyone who wants to contact Daphne. That was a marvelous presentation. I feel like as though I were transported to another time. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Now is the time for questions, folks. So you can put your questions into the chat. And I see that we do have a question already. Did any of the children turn to piracy?
No, they did not.
Okay. And here's another question. Where was Captain Kidd born?
He was born in Scotland. In Scotland. I'm trying to remember the town. Oh, Dundee, Scotland.
Okay, very good. And here's just a comment. What a great story and presentation. 2 exclamation points.
Thank you very much.
Here's another comment. You mentioned William Kidd had flaws. What were they?
His flaws was that he was vulnerable to the mutiny of his men. And he also lost his temper on board ship. When his men were mutinous, his gunner mouthed off to him and he hit him over the head with a wooden bucket and the man died. And so one of the charges against Captain Kidd was murder, even though it was not premeditated. And certainly no captain could ever have allowed an insolent crew member on his ship. But what was his flaws? His flaws were that he was vulnerable. And a good flaw, I suppose, is that he risked his life to come from the Indian Ocean back to New York to meet up with his wife and children to try to save his life. And his flaw is that he was human. He was very human.
Here's another question or comment. This person says, I bet you're targeting a book on Maria of the Widow fame, which is of course, the museum has a lot about the Widow in Yarmouth. And Maria was the mistress of that pirate, Bellamy.
The supposed mistress. Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. It is an interesting story.
Here's another question. How many pirates were hanged by the British?
I don't know that number. I don't know that number. There was quite a few, but I don't know the exact number.
And please explain again about how letters were transported across the oceans.
Sure. Merchant captains who were transporting goods across the ocean would stop at Ascension Island to get fresh supplies. It was a great place for fresh turtle meat, which was a favorite at the time. And they would pick up mail and drop off mail at a certain place, which was near the harbor. It was a rock that had a hole in it, and that's where they would deposit letters and they would pick up letters.
Very interesting. And
Very low tech.
Right. Here's a comment. I'll be looking forward to reading your books. Is that comment?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I had a question. I noticed that your dog, Higgins, the King Charles Spaniel, is the same dog as was in the painting.
You know, that is a very funny coincidence, because I had Higgins many years before I even began writing this story, or before I ever saw this picture of Captain Kidd in the harbor. So it's just a funny coincidence that we both have Cavalier King Charleses.
So that's funny. Here's another question. You alluded that William Kidd was betrayed by his prior political supporters. Was he arrested on credible charges or for falling out of favor with his supporters?
He was arrested because he was charged with murder and piracy. At the time, the king was offering a pardon to all pirates, and Captain Kidd expected to be pardoned, but the king and his investors deliberately cited Captain Kidd as not being included in the pardon. And that is because they were secret investors and they didn't want it to be known that they were profiting from the war. So they made Captain Kidd the scapegoat.
Okay. And here's a comment. Great job. Very interesting.
Thank you.
And a question. Did the adventure galley sink in the Madagascar area?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Other questions? I'll ask another thought I had while we're waiting for other questions. Obviously, you did an enormous amount of research on this. Was there some way of knowing that Sarah knew where the buried treasure was, or was that sort of surmising that?
Well, it's very evident, because if she had retrieved the buried treasure, it would have set off alarms. They would have known that she went from destitute. She was destitute and homeless after Captain Kidd was executed. She was, all her belongings were seized and she lost everything. She was a social outcast. And if she had retrieved Captain Kidd's treasure, it would have been very evident that she all of a sudden was made wealthy. So it is very clear that she knew where it was, but did not retrieve it. Treasure hunters to this day are still looking for it, and I get wonderful phone calls and emails saying, "Can you just tell me where it is?" But I truly think that Sarah is the only one who knew, because she was she was his absolute trusted confidant.
Very fascinating. Other questions, folks? So we've had a lot of questions, but we have a little bit of a pause. Here's another question. Here we go. It's interesting that what was mainly a sideshow of that era captures the imagination of so many due to the myth, not the reality of the pirates' existence. Pirates' existence, nasty, brutal, and short. So I'm not sure if I'm reading that correctly, but it's a little bit confusing. What I think that what the point of that is, that there's a lot of mythology around pirates, and someone like you does the research, and the reality is quite different.
Yes, yes, the reality is very different.
Okay, other questions, folks, or comments? Here's another one. Give us a sense of how many pirates were of that generation.
You mean how many pirates there were in the period? There was several thousand, could be as many as 5,000 over a period from about 1650 to 1720.
Okay. And I had another question. You were in the reading of her at the end of her life, where she looked at it as a badge of honor being a pirate's wife. Was that surmised from things that you read about her, or where did that come from?
Yes, so that was surmised from all the things that she said and did, and how she lived her life.
Yeah, so that was interesting. So another couple of questions. So in essence, Lord Belmont framed Kidd.
Yes.
Okay. And here's another one. What did Sarah do to sustain her family?
When?
I guess maybe after Kidd was executed, is when she had lost everything. Perhaps that refers to.
If that refers to the period right after his execution, she did have family in the area. Her father was in the area, and as I mentioned in the book, he did help her. She did remarry 2 years after Captain Kidd's death. And so she was reestablished in society, and her husband was a merchant, and so that's how she's sustained her family.
Mm-hmm. Here's another question. Was Kidd executed in Manhattan?
No, he was executed in London on the River Thames. He was taken from Boston to London to be tried, and he was put in Newgate prison for over a year, and then he was tried, convicted, and executed there.
Okay. Other questions, folks? Now's your opportunity. Quite a lot of questions, good questions.
Yeah, great questions.
So, okay, seeing none. Well, Daphne, I just want to thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank
And
you.
thank you all for coming tonight to this conversation. We hope to see everyone soon at the museum when we open for the summer. And again, thank you for being here tonight. We had a nice big crowd. I'm seeing people applauding. And I am now seeing a last minute question. What got you interested in this subject?
Oh, that's a great question. It was actually when I wrote that article for the New York Times that I was really captivated by seeing the artifacts of the pirates. And I realized that they were just ordinary men, and I wanted to know who they were. And as ordinary men, they were, they had, relatives, they had wives, and they had brothers and sisters and cousins and friends. And I just wondered who are these men that we've heard so much about, but it's all fictitious and it's all made up, and it's, it's all quite fascinating. And the the legends and the lores just continue, and there seems to be no end with the fascination of pirates. So I wanted to know who they really were. And really, I wanted to know who the pirates were, but I wanted to know their other half. I wanted to know about the women in their lives.
And here's a comment, which is maybe a good way to wrap it up. This person says, make sure to visit the Widow Museum, which
Absolutely.
I believe is
Absolutely. It's a wonderful place.
in Yarmouth on Route 28.
Yes, it's a wonderful place.
So great. Well, thank you again, Daphne. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you all for coming.
Have a great night, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.